The parking lot asphalt was still warm under my boots as I walked toward my truck. Every muscle in my body was screaming from another grueling week of sleeping barely 3 hours a night. That was when I heard it, footsteps pounding on the pavement behind me, growing louder and more frantic. "Grant, Grant, wait." The voice belonged to Stuart Bradley, my director. His voice cracked like he had swallowed a handful of dry sand. I did not turn around. My hand was already on the cold metal of my truck door handle. My resignation email had been sent exactly 4 minutes ago. That email was currently sitting in the inbox of our Chief Executive Officer, Julian Prescott, our Chief Financial Officer, Evelyn Cross, the entire Executive Board, and half of the senior leadership team. The message contained an attachment showing our final fourth-quarter revenue numbers, which had reached a staggering $320 million, right next to a high-resolution photograph of a $6 coffee shop voucher. It also contained a formal legal notification, invoking my rights under Title 17, United States Code, Section 106, officially revoking their license to use my proprietary portfolio management algorithm. My name is Grant Fletcher, and until about 5 minutes ago, I was the Senior Portfolio Director at Bayside Wealth Solutions. That title sounds impressive, and it should. I had earned it through 8 long years of dragging this company from mediocre performance to record-breaking quarters. I had built their core analysis systems from scratch, managed teams across 4 different time zones, and personally closed deals that made our competitors physically ill. But in reality, that title simply meant I was the person they called at 2 o'clock in the morning when a major deal was falling apart. I was the one who missed my 20th anniversary dinner with my wife Clara because a high-net-worth client needed hand-holding. I was the one who had not taken a real vacation in 3 years because Stuart constantly reminded me that nobody else understood the system. Now, Stuart's footsteps were close. I could hear him gasping for air. He was not exactly the athletic type, and the most exercise he had gotten all year was walking from his corner office to the executive dining room. I threw my bag into the passenger seat and finally turned around to face him. He was bent over, hands on his knees, his face the color of a ripe tomato. His tie was crooked, and there was a coffee stain on his shirt that had been there since our morning meeting. That morning meeting was where he had handed me the envelope. You cannot just," he wheezed, struggle in his voice. "You cannot just leave like this." I crossed my arms and leaned against the side of my truck. The metal was hot through my blazer, but I did not care. I had been burning up from the inside for months anyway. "Actually, Stuart, I can. It is called at-will employment. It works both ways, remember? You love reminding the analysts of that during layoff season." His face went from tomato red to a deep, alarming shade of purple. "You sent that email to everyone," he whispered. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" I knew exactly what I had done. That was the whole point. But to understand how I ended up in a hot parking lot, watching my former director have a minor panic attack, we have to go back 3 months. That was when our Chief Executive Officer, Julian Prescott, announced the most ambitious expansion in Bayside history. We were going to acquire 2 smaller firms, launch a new digital wealth platform, and break into 3 new markets simultaneously. It was an aggressive, bordering on reckless strategy, but the potential payoff was enormous. Julian stood in front of the entire company during an all-hands meeting and promised that the effort would require sacrifice from all of us. But when we pulled it off, everyone who contributed would be rewarded beyond their expectations. Everyone nodded and applauded. We went back to our desks and prepared for the storm. But the storm that hit my department was not just bad weather. It was a Category 5 hurricane that lasted 12 weeks straight. My team of 10 people was suddenly managing a workload that should have required 25. 2 of our senior analysts quit in the first month. Unable to handle the pressure, Stuart refused to let me backfill their positions. "We need to stay lean during the transition," he had told me, his voice dripping with corporate platitudes. "It is only temporary, Grant. Temporary is a word that should be banned from the corporate vocabulary." I started working 75 hours a week. Soon, 75 hours became 84. I would wake up at 5 in the morning, and I was already on my second conference call of the day. Clara would leave for her job, and I would be staring at spreadsheets. She would return in the evening, and I would still be typing away, building financial models, reviewing regulatory compliance documents, and managing crisis after crisis. She would go to bed at 11, and I would still be awake, the glow from my laptop screen the only light in our home office. "Grant, this is not sustainable," Clara told me one evening. She was standing in the doorway, holding a mug of tea she had made for me. "I know," I muttered, not looking away from my screen. "Just a few more weeks. Once the platform launches and the acquisition closes, things will settle down." "You said that a month ago," she replied softly. She set the tea down on my desk, gently moving a stack of folders. I looked at her tired eyes and felt a sharp pang of guilt. When was the last time we had a conversation that was not about Bayside? I had ignored Clara's warning because I was too deep in the corporate machine to see the exit. The pressure was immense. I was working 84 hours in a single week during the final push to launch the new wealth platform. I tracked my hours because part of me did not believe it was humanly possible until I saw the numbers written down. Monday, 16 hours. Tuesday, 18 hours. Wednesday, 17 hours. Thursday, 19 hours. Friday, 14 hours. And that was only because my body simply shut down at my desk around midnight on Friday, and Clara had to physically wake me and guide me to bed. When I woke up on Saturday morning, every muscle in my body ached. It was not the pleasant soreness after a good workout, it was the deep, throbbing ache of physical exhaustion. My fingers were stiff from typing, my shoulders were frozen from hours of slouching over the keyboard, and my eyes were red and dry. Clara brought me breakfast in bed, sitting silently as I ate. She did not say "I told you so," but her silence spoke volumes. "Is this really worth it?" she asked quietly. "Whatever bonus they give you, is it worth what this is doing to your health?" I did not answer her because I did not want to admit that I was gambling on Julian Prescott keeping his word. I believed in the promise of a reward that would match our sacrifice. After all, Bayside was thriving. The acquisition of the two smaller firms went through ahead of schedule, and the digital wealth platform launched with barely any technical glitches. The reason the launch was so smooth was because the platform was built around a proprietary portfolio optimization engine I had developed. I called it the Fletcher Optima algorithm. I had spent 5 years refining the mathematical models in my own time, long before the expansion was even conceived. To protect my work, I had registered it with the United States Copyright Office, securing a registration certificate under Title 17 of the United States Code. Bayside did not own the algorithm. Instead, they had a limited, non-exclusive license to use it, a license that was explicitly tied to my active employment with the firm. If I left the company, the license terminated automatically, and Bayside would have no legal right to run the code. A week after the launch, Julian Prescott sent out a company-wide email with the subject line celebrating our record-breaking fourth quarter. I opened it with a beating heart, expecting to see the details of our bonuses and promotions. The email was 3 paragraphs of corporate self-congratulation filled with empty phrases about synergy, dedication, and operational excellence. At the very bottom, it stated that department heads would recognize team members individually for their contributions and thanked us for our continued dedication. There was no mention of bonuses, no salary adjustments, and no promotions. In the open plan office around me, I could hear my team members reading the email. Miles, my senior analyst, let out a dry, bitter laugh. Alan muttered a curse under his breath, while Fiona stared blankly at her screen. "Well," Miles said, leaning back in his chair, "I guess we are getting cheap pastries in the break room." He was not far off. 2 days later, Stuart Bradley sent out a meeting invitation titled Performance Recognition. It was scheduled for 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, which is always the universal corporate sign for bad news wrapped in a polite bow. We filed into the small windowless conference room under the harsh, fluorescent lights. The exhaustion in the room was palpable. Miles had dark circles under his eyes that looked like bruises. Fiona had been working so constantly, she had started taking client calls from the hallway just to keep up. Alan had missed his daughter's school play, and Beatrice had postponed her wedding by 6 months because she could not take time off for a honeymoon. These people had given everything to Bayside, and they were running on empty. Stuart walked in carrying a small paper bag from the local coffee shop. He was smiling, which was my first warning sign. Stewart only smiled when he was about to deliver news he knew would disappoint people. Team, he began, setting the bag on the table, I want to personally thank each of you for your extraordinary efforts this quarter. What we accomplished is nothing short of remarkable. The executives are thrilled with our performance, and while we cannot make major compensation adjustments outside of the normal review cycle, I wanted to do something to show my appreciation. He reached into the bag and began handing out small envelopes to each person. When he reached me, he patted my shoulder. Especially you, Grant. Your leadership was exceptional. I opened the envelope. Inside was a plastic gift card to the coffee shop down the street. I turned it over. The value printed on the card was $6. I looked around the room and saw the rest of my team opening their envelopes. They had all received the exact same $6 voucher. I know it is small, Stewart said with a weak, embarrassed smile, but I wanted everyone to treat themselves. Appreciate the little things, right? The silence in the room was deafening. Fiona stared at her card as if it were insulting her, and Alan clenched his jaw so tight I thought he would break a tooth. Something inside me snapped. I did not throw the card at Stewart's head, though the impulse was strong. I did not storm out or raise my voice. Instead, I forced a calm, genuine smile that probably looked slightly unsettling. You are absolutely right, Stewart, I said, keeping my tone perfectly even. We should appreciate the little things. He looked visibly relieved, nodding in agreement. Exactly, Grant, he said, clearly glad to avoid a confrontation. It is the thought that counts. The thought that our sleepless nights, our missed family dinners, our ruined health, and a record-breaking quarter that brought in $320 million of revenue were worth the price of a cheap breakfast combo. The meeting ended, and the team shuffled out in silence, holding their vouchers like evidence at a crime scene. I walked back to my desk and sat down. My hands were shaking, not from fatigue, but from a cold, crystalline fury. This was not just about money, although the $6 value was a slap in the face. It was the realization that my value to Bayside was mathematically rounded down to zero. I had personally generated $65 million in new client portfolio this quarter alone. My models had secured the key contracts. Yet, Stewart and Julian Prescott believed a pat on the head and a coffee coupon were sufficient payment for our sacrifice. I looked at my computer screen. The dashboard showed the real-time activity of our new digital wealth platform, which was currently processing millions in client transactions using my Fletcher Optima code. I opened a new email. In the recipient line, I typed Stewart's address. In the carbon copy line, I added Julian Prescott, Evelyn Cross, the entire board of directors, the head of human resources, and every senior director in the division. I wanted to make sure there was no way to hide what was about to happen. The subject line of my message was clear: resignation effective immediately and revocation of software license. I did not write in corporate code. I wrote with the clinical precision of a surgeon. Dear Stewart, I began. This email serves as formal notice of my resignation from Bayside Wealth Solutions, effective immediately. I am attaching 2 documents to this email. The first is our final fourth quarter revenue report, showing $320 million in total revenue. The second is a photograph of the $6 coffee shop voucher you handed me today as appreciation for my contribution to those numbers. During this quarter, I worked an average of 75 hours per week, culminating in an 84-hour week during the platform launch. I managed a team that was understaffed by 60% while taking on the responsibilities of 3 senior-level positions. Then, I typed the legal weapon that would dismantle Bayside's crown jewel. Furthermore, please be advised that the limited, non-exclusive license granted to Bayside Wealth Solutions for the use and execution of the Fletcher Optima portfolio optimization algorithm is hereby terminated, coextensive with the end of my employment. As the sole author and registered copyright owner of this software, I retain all exclusive rights under Title 17, United States Code, Section 106. Any continued execution, reproduction, or distribution of this code on Bayside's digital wealth platform after my departure constitutes willful copyright infringement under federal law. To avoid statutory damages of up to $150,000 per infringement, under Title 17, United States Code, Section 504. Bayside must immediately cease all operation of the Fletcher Optima software module. I advise your legal department to review this matter immediately. My corporate laptop, keycard, and credit card are on my desk. Feel free to apply my remaining paid time off to my final paycheck. Sincerely, Grant Fletcher. I attached the revenue spreadsheet, the photograph of the voucher, and the scanned copy of my federal copyright registration certificate. My finger hovered over the send button for a fraction of a second. Then I clicked it. The soft whoosh of the sent mail was the most satisfying sound I had heard in 8 years. I stood up and looked around the office. People were still typing, making phone calls, and planning their weekends, completely unaware that a legal nuclear option had just landed in the executive inboxes. I began packing my personal belongings. I did not have much to pack. A framed photo of Claire and me during our vacation in Maine, my favorite ceramic mug, and a small, resilient, succulent plant that had survived my neglect. 6 years of my life at Bayside were packed into a single canvas bag in less than 2 minutes. I left my corporate laptop open, the screen displaying the sent email. I laid my keycard next to it, with the corporate credit card resting on top. As I walked toward the exit, Miles looked up from his monitor. "Heading out early, Grant?" he asked. I smiled at him, my bag slung over my shoulder. "Yes, Miles, I am. In fact, I just resigned. You might want to update your resume this weekend, because things are about to get very interesting around here." Before he could ask any questions, I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. The descent felt like shedding a heavy suit of armor. When I reached the lobby, the late afternoon sun was pouring through the glass doors. The air outside was warm, and the parking lot asphalt felt hot under my boots. I walked toward my truck, my keys jingling in my hand. That was when I heard the building doors slam open behind me, followed by the sound of rapid, heavy footsteps. "Grant! Grant, wait!" Stewart was jogging toward me, gasping for breath. He looked disheveled. His tie was loose. His collar was damp with sweat, and the coffee stain on his shirt was prominent under the bright sunlight. He stopped about 6 feet away from me, hands on his hips, trying to catch his breath. "You cannot," he panted. "You cannot just leave like this." I leaned against the side of my truck and crossed my arms. "Actually, Stewart, I can. As we have discussed during every annual review, I am an at-will employee. I can leave whenever I choose. Works both ways. Remember?" Stewart held up his phone, his screen displaying the email notifications. "You sent that message to the entire board," he said, his voice trembling. "Julian is furious. Evelyn is demanding an emergency meeting. Do you have any idea what you have done?" "I made sure the board knows exactly how this company rewards the people who make their expansion possible," I replied calmly. Stewart shook his head, his face turning a deeper shade of red. "This is completely unprofessional, Grant. The voucher was a gesture of appreciation. We have budget constraints. You know that bonuses are decided at the executive level, not by department heads like me. So you thought a $6 gift card was a suitable substitute for honesty?" I asked. "If you had just sat us down and explained that the board was reinvesting all the profits into the expansion and that bonuses were delayed, we would have been disappointed, but we would have respected the truth. Instead, you chose to treat our sacrifice like a minor inconvenience that could be solved with 2 lattes." Stewart deflated slightly, looking around the parking lot. "We can talk about this on Monday," he pleaded. "Take the weekend to cool off. I am sure we can work something out, maybe adjust your base salary or find some extra budget for your team. There is nothing to work out, Stewart. I am done. And I suggest you contact Bayside's legal department immediately. I have already sent a copy of my copyright registration certificate to my attorney. If the digital wealth platform executes the Fletcher Optima module after 5 o'clock this afternoon, we will file a federal lawsuit for copyright infringement under Title 17 United States Code, Section 501. The statutory damages under Section 504 will compile with every single portfolio transaction Bayside processes." Stewart went completely pale, his mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. He had thought I was just throwing a tantrum. Now he realized Bayside's new $320 million platform was facing a legal shutdown. I did not wait for him to recover. I got into my truck, started the engine, and rolled down the window. "Have a nice weekend, Stewart." I said, before driving out of the parking lot. The drive home was only 20 minutes, but it felt like entering a different dimension. I called Clara from the car. "Hey," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I am coming home, and I just resigned." There was a brief silence on the line, followed by her calm, reassuring voice. "Okay," she said. "Drive safe. We will talk when you get here." When I pulled into the driveway, Clara was waiting on the front porch. I got out of the truck and she met me at the steps, wrapping her arms around me. I held her tight, feeling the stress of the last 3 months begin to melt away. "You okay?" she asked, looking at my face. "I am now," I replied. Inside, the house smelled of garlic and basil. She had made lasagna, my favorite meal. We sat at the dining table, and for the first time in months, my phone was placed face down in another room. I told her everything: the $6 voucher, the resignation email, the copyright revocation, and Stuart chasing me through the parking lot. Clara listened, squeezing my hand occasionally, a warm smile spreading across her face. "I am proud of you," she said when I finished. "We will be fine. My salary covers the mortgage, and we have enough savings. Take all the time you need to find a company that actually deserves you." By Saturday morning, my phone was flooded with 47 notifications. Word had spread. I had messages from former colleagues, industry peers, and several recruiters. Miles, Fiona, and Alan had sent texts, letting me know they had also submitted their resignations. But the most interesting message came from a recruiter named Jared Foster. "Grant," he wrote, "I represent several wealth management firms that would love to speak with you about senior leadership roles. Also, for what it is worth, that resignation email was the most spectacular departure I have seen in 20 years of recruiting. Let me know when you are ready to talk." The most significant phone call came on Monday morning. I was sitting on my back porch, enjoying a cup of coffee when my phone rang. The screen displayed an unknown local number. I answered it. "Grant Fletcher?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded poised and professional. "Yes, speaking. My name is Diana Mercer," she said. "I am a member of the board of directors at Bayside Wealth Solutions. I want to apologize to you. Your email was forwarded to the entire board over the weekend. We spent the last 48 hours conducting an emergency audit of our department management and compensation structures. What you and your team experienced was completely unacceptable." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I appreciate the apology, Diana," I said. "But what is the purpose of this call?" "We are cleaning house," she explained. "Julian Prescott has been asked to step down as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. We are bringing in Audrey Gable as our interim Chief Executive Officer to restructure the organization. Stuart Bradley has been demoted and suspended pending a formal human resources investigation. More importantly, Bayside's legal department confirmed your copyright ownership of the portfolio engine. We had to disable the Fletcher Optima module on Friday night to avoid federal liability under Title 17, United States Code, Section 501, which has caused severe operational issues on our wealth platform. We want to offer you your position back, but with a promotion to vice president, complete autonomy over your team, and a substantial compensation package." I laughed quietly. "That is a generous offer, Diana," I said. "But I will have to decline." "May I ask why?" she inquired. "Because it should not have required a public resignation and a threat of copyright litigation for the board to notice that its employees were being worked to death," I answered. "I do not believe a company can fix a toxic culture simply by replacing a few executives. If I came back, the underlying systems of exploitation would eventually return." Diana was silent for a moment before sighing. "I understand your position, Grant," she said. "If you change your mind, my door is always open." The next afternoon, I was sitting at a local coffee shop when a man in a tailored suit approached my table. "Grant Fletcher?" he asked. I looked up. He looked familiar. "Yes." "James Rothman?" No, I realized it was Carlton Briggs, the chief executive officer of Apex Capital Group, Bayside's chief competitor. "May I join you?" he asked. I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat down and slid a thick blue folder across the table. "Your resignation has caused quite a stir," Carlton said, with a slight grin. "Bayside had to disable their portfolio system, and 3 of their largest institutional clients have already contacted us about moving their portfolios to Apex. They do not trust a firm that treats its key developers so poorly. I want to offer you the position of Vice President of Strategic Development at Apex. I opened the folder. The proposed base salary was 50% higher than my previous salary at Bayside. The package included an equity stake, a guarantee of adequate team staffing, 25 days of annual paid time off, and a clause explicitly recognizing my intellectual property rights. At the bottom of the page, there was a handwritten note. Your value is not measured in coffee vouchers. I looked up at Carlton. My assistant insisted I add that note, he said, smiling. We believe in treating our people with respect, Grant. Do we have a deal? I looked at the contract for 10 seconds. When do I start? I asked. How about in 4 weeks, he replied. Take some time to rest first. We shook hands, and I felt a profound sense of relief. Over the next few months, Bayside's fortunes declined rapidly. Without the Fletcher Optima engine, their digital platform suffered constant performance issues. Within 3 months, 15 senior employees left the firm, and Bayside's stock price dropped by 18%. I started my new role at Apex Capital Group 4 weeks later, and the experience was everything Bayside should have been. My team was fully staffed, my boundaries were respected, and I finally had time to spend with Clara. I also started a blog called Know Your Worth, sharing advice on recognizing corporate exploitation and negotiating employment contracts. Within 4 months, the blog grew to 60,000 followers. Within 8 months, a publisher approached me about writing a book on workplace culture. 10 months after my resignation, I ran into Julian Prescott at an industry conference. He had been forced out of Bayside and was now working as an independent consultant. We ended up in the same elevator, and the silence between us was thick. Finally, he looked at me. Grant, he said quietly, you were right. I got so focused on the expansion numbers that I forgot about the people who were actually building the company. I appreciate you saying that, Julian, I replied. I hope you carry that lesson into your future consulting work. The elevator doors opened and we parted ways. Later that day, I stood on the main stage as the keynote speaker, talking to hundreds of professionals about building sustainable corporate environments. I spoke about the dangers of burnout and the importance of self-worth. In my home office, the $6 coffee shop voucher sits in a simple black frame on my desk. It is not a symbol of anger, but a monument to the moment I decided my value could never be defined by a corporate budget. Sometimes, hitting your breaking point is the only way to find your freedom.